do a lengthy usual housekeeping introduction, but thank you so much all for joining us today for this final group consult and what has been a marathon contract and a marathon year with regards to the climate survey pieces. And I'm just so thankful both to Sharon and all her hard work and continuing to be creative and flexible as needed. And the same for all of you as your campuses have dealt with any number of issues related to the pandemic and other things going on in the world. I'm so thankful to have so many of you here today and so many of you that hung in there through this process to get data for your campuses. And so just wanted to recognize that and tell you all that I appreciate you very much for that. We will get started here shortly. I'm going to turn it over to Sharon, but just a reminder that we are recording the webinar today. So that will be made available upon request. So if you're listening today and you want to review it again later, or you want to share it with others on your campus, who are unable to join today, you can just shoot me an email and I will be happy to send you a copy of the recording once it is ready to go. I will also be monitoring the chat room throughout the presentation today so Sharon can focus on the presentation. So if you have any questions or comments or anything for the group or for Sharon, please just go ahead and utilize that chat room function. You should be able to find the chat bubble down in the lower sorry, I have to do my left and my right of my hands again. Right-hand side of your screen, just click on that, it'll pop up as needed. And then I think, as Sharon said, if she prompts you or there's the ability to do more of a group discussion, which there may not be today, all you have to do is just click on the little microphone button to unmute yourself to contribute if prompted by Sharon as she's presenting today. So thank you once again to all of you for being here today. Thank you, Sharon, for putting this all together. And I will turn it over to you at this point. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. I will underscore all the thank yous and jump right in. I am Dr. Sharon Wasco. I'm guessing I know most of you on this call. If I don't, I'm a community psychologist and in a program evaluator, and in the context of this project, a data to action consultant. So the last several months of my work on this project has focused on generating useful tools with the data that you all have worked so hard to collect, in hopes that I can give you, again, tools that you can use to use the data to improve the work that you're doing. And most of you have, well, everybody should have a individualized campus report that compares either your students and your employees or your data or your data from 2018 and your data from this phase. Another thing that we think can be really useful to you is having a sense of the aggregate statewide data. So we kind of pooled all the information, all the surveys that were collected, and I'm going to share back some of the learnings from that, as well as I think we can make these slides available, the recording will be available, and there is a I think it's a 4-page document right now that summarizes all of these results. So there's no need to take notes. I would encourage you just to try to focus on what I'm saying and what you're looking at and figure out how you might come back and use it later. The agenda for today is really going to be looking at the statewide trends in change. So looking at 2 time points and measuring whether or not there were any changes from what we saw in 2018, looking at all the aggregate data and what we see this year. I'm calling those round 1 and round 2. And this is when we talk about change, this is what we really can think of as outcomes. Outcomes is you have an indicator and you take a time point, you take a snapshot at one point and you take a snapshot at a different point and you compare those. Any difference is considered an outcome or a change. In addition to that, we know that our campuses are very, very, very different. Every single campus is different from every single other campus, but we do have some large kinds of buckets that we can think about campuses. This is the typology where we've kind of thought about the campuses enrolled in this year's and last year's climate survey services as private institutions, 4-year public institutions, and 2-year public institutions. And what you'll see here is that On every single indicator we looked at, there were statistically significant differences by those groups. So there was an effect of campus type on every single indicator of campus change that we looked at. I want to throw out some of the beginnings of ideas on what this means for us, what some of the action opportunities are, and possible next steps. You're going to find when you compare today's findings to the findings in your own report, there are going to be some places where what happened at your campus contributed to the aggregate trend that I'm describing today. And then you're going to find for some of you some places where your campus's pattern is in direct contrast to the larger trend, that you may have the opposite thing going on your campus. And either one of those, in my perspective, is a really fascinating thing to discover. But if you are one of the campuses for some of these findings where your campus mimics the trend that we see or contributes to the trend that we see in the state, then the action opportunities and the possibilities that we talk about today are ones that you can take home to your campus. I do want to say these reports are very information dense. I have been breaking them down with about 17 campuses that have enrolled in the data to action, individualized consulting, and we know from working on this together, there's lots there. I would encourage you, if you're listening to this and you have the opportunity to stop, you're listening to the recorded video, maybe go back and watch the how to use your report video or webinar recording that explains a lot of how the report is set up. I don't have time to revisit all of that. We are going to actually jump right into looking at these statewide trends, but there is a lot of useful information in that first recording. So the data today comes from 56 different campuses that enrolled in our vendor services. Looks like I have an old version up. I can tell because I see a little spelling error here. Please make this an O in your mind. Of those 56 campuses, 52 collected data. I do want to acknowledge this. We were in the middle of a global pandemic and it's been hard for all of us, and it meant that some people were not able to prioritize this work. There's been a lot of turnover. If you're on this call, it's possible that you're in a new position. We had lots of furloughs and reconstructions and reallocations, and I do want to acknowledge that that piece of history that happened. Of those campuses that collected data, we have 12 brave campuses that just pushed forward through the pandemic. 15 campuses rescheduled their data collection for fall, and 25 campuses collected in spring, which is, in my opinion, probably the ideal time frame for collecting climate survey data for a number of different reasons. Of those campuses, 51 shared their data with the vendor to be analyzed. So we have 51 campuses, a data set of 51 campuses that have their student and employee data from round 2. Of those 51 campuses, there were 8 new campuses to vendor services this year, which means only 43 of this year's campuses had data collected with OAESV, so that we have their student data from round 1, 2017, 2018. And because employee data was optional to collect in the first round, 35 of the campuses included in today's data set have employee data. This is a lot of data. So 56,397 surveys included in these analyses. We are going to break them down, as I mentioned, and look at differences by campus type. And it was really lovely to see that there's an approximate 3-way split. You know, I could have moved the scalpel probably a little better by design, but the way that this worked out is a really nice 3-way split in terms of the surveys that are included in the data analysis. And I'm going to pause right there, literally, and take a breath. And I just want to again say that there is a lot of data. You're going to be looking a lot of numbers. You may not get them exactly right this time, but you will have a tool that you can go back. And again, the idea is this is a supplemental data use tool that you can use to look at your own results and see where you fit in the bigger statewide trends. So let's dive in. And there's always that person in the pool that's like, oh, it's warm, come in, come in, come in. But I'm going to show you from this picture, like, I know I'm flailing out here. So jump on in and flail with me. I'm going to basically present to you table 1, which is something you've all seen in your reports. And then a complement to table 1, which is where we look at the differences by campus type. So for each of these sections, the first question is, has there been change since 2018? And we can see that change by looking at the difference between the number in the first column that says 2018, the number in the colored column, purple for students, teal for employees, is this the data from round 2. And then in this delta column is whether or not that was an intended outcome or an unintended outcome, or there was no statistically significant difference, which is the yellow dots. And again, if this doesn't look familiar to you, I would certainly invite you to read your report where it's explained in more detail, or revisit that earlier webinar. The next thing that we're going to look at is just the 2021 data. And again, picture this one number of, let's look at percent who experience sexual harassment victimization. For students, that's 11%. We're now going to take just that one indicator, split it 3 ways into the 3 different campus types, and say, are there statistically significant differences in the patterns that we see there? So we're just looking at the 2021 data. And that's really important because we have had what in the methodological world is considered a massive history effect, where between 2018 and 2021, the things that our country and this globe has been through have probably had possibly a stronger effect on anything that we're measuring this year than the work that you did. Not entirely true, but for that reason, it's important to kind of compare where you are with other people in this moment, because we've all changed so much. So what does that look like? And this is a new table for all of you. So this would be the time, if you aren't following and there's a simple clarification question, type it in the chat. Carrie can read it out to me. Again, let's look at that. Let's take that sexual harassment number. We know that when we looked at all students, it was 11%, right? And when we looked at all employees, it was 4%. Now we're looking at how that differs across the 3 different types. So the columns here represent 4-year publics, starting from left to right, private institutions, and then 2-year public institutions. That same pattern is the way it's presented for employees, 4-year publics, privates, and 2-year publics. So we see that that overall 11 number, if you're in a private campus, you're kind of modeling the statewide results. The number is statistically significantly higher for 4-year publics, and statistically significantly lower for 2-year publics. The trend is not as evident among employees, so there's a lot to learn here. I'm not going to go over every single finding here. The idea is that I hope that you will understand what this tool is, and that you'll be able to use the supporting data to use consultation tools that come from this. So another little thing to explain is, as I mentioned at the beginning, every single indicator that we're going to look at, every single row in every single table that I ran an analysis on, there was a statistically significant difference by campus type. Every single one. I did not expect that, but it makes it very easy for us to think about. There are just really evident changes in the kinds of campuses, the way that we've grouped them in the state of Ohio. The patterns are not always the same, but one thing to understand when I'm comparing means, which are these numbers that look like this, where we have an average score, after you find a statistically significant effect, you look in deeper to try to see what's driving that effect, what's causing that effect. And so you look at the differences between each of the two possible pairs. So a little A next to a number means that the four-year public number is statistically significant from its neighbor to the right, which is the private. The B means that this number is statistically significant from the neighbor to its right, which is the two-year public. And the C means that this number, 2.27, is statistically significant from its neighbor to the right. So you're basically looking at pairwise each of the possible combinations, and those are marked for each indicator in this document, in these tables that will be given to you. And so the idea here is that you want to compare your data. You should have numbers that look like this in your tables to the appropriate column. What I've gone through in each of these slides is highlighted kind of the desirable, the best indicator out there. This is not a competition. Obviously, we're all learning from each other and doing this work, but in this case, what we're seeing is a trend where the scope of sexual misconduct based on these data appears to be least severe on the two-year public institutions, and we're going to talk about that. So the ones that are in gray are kind of your best performance indicator. All right, any questions in the chat, Carrie? Or if people want to unmute themselves, that's easy too. We're going to go through a bunch of these, and then again, my main thing is to kind of talk a little bit about what does this mean, because these are going to look like a lot of numbers to you until you have a chance to really sit down with them and compare your numbers to where these are. And what it's going to give you is a tool to be able to compare yourself. If you're an Apple, say you're a four-year, uh-oh, I don't know how to undo that. Let me share. If you are an Apple, which say it's a four-year public, you want to compare yourself to other apples. If you're an orange, you want to compare yourself to the other orange. Oh, no. Sorry, it's advancing on its own. It's a slideshow. I don't want that either. Okay. So there are some action opportunities here. That first X that said there was an increase in students' beliefs that sexual misconduct was a problem, on the extent to which sexual misconduct was a problem on campus. I kind of had predetermined that should be going down. In fact, that went up. And it made me think there is an opportunity to redefine what success looks like in this work, because I'm not so sure that really is a negative finding. Maybe we want our students to be acknowledging that there's a problem so that they can activate and become the upstanders we want them to be. So I know that a lot of the original benchmarks, and that one in particular, came from the community readiness assessment and a tool that was developed by Vicki Banyard and other folks back when she was at UNH. really useful as you're getting people involved in the work. I think the community readiness data that we looked at this year, and I'm not presenting it right now, suggests that the entire state is at like a level 6 or 7. Initiation, stabilization, and some campuses even higher. So I would invite us to really think about what is it that we want now. We've definitely gotten to readiness. We know from those 2 yellow dots where our students' victimization rates did not change. There was no significant difference in victimization, that we still have work to do. We have an opportunity to continue bringing down those student victimization rates. As preventionists, we try to work ourselves out of a job. We haven't done it yet. And then lastly, I would like to suggest that there's a better opportunity to there is an opportunity to better understand vulnerable students at 2-year public institutions. And so this opens up lots of possibilities as we move forward. When I have the opportunity section up, if you can think of possibilities and enter them into the chat before I do, I'm modeling it here for you first, but I would invite you to, when we're looking at opportunities next, to put ideas into the possibility chat. I think we're in a really good space 5-6 years into this work to hold discussions about what are the commonly held beliefs that we want our students and employees to have. Possibility in terms of bringing down those student victimization rates, we have to level up our prevention game. There's a number of emerging and promising practices in prevention that I'm really excited about. Certainly a comprehensive prevention plan with specific data-based goals. So get that comprehensive prevention plan in place. Within that prevention plan, make sure that you're targeting shared risk factors that sexual violence shares with other problems that we're looking at, whether that be racial discrimination or marginalization of LGBTQ communities, or intimate partner violence, which has long been kind of our shared risk factors. Other things that we can talk about there. In that work, I also would encourage us to consider using behaviorally specific incidence measures as we really do work towards prevention. It's going to be hard to see those prevalence rates go down even in 2-year timeframes, but we can start to track incidence rates, and that might be a move that some of us are ready to make. Many of you on this call have already included those measures in your climate surveys. Finally, and I know this from talking to many of my 2-year publics, those data that we just looked at do not include any students under the age of 18, which for many 2-year public campuses is an entire really important segment of their population, which is CCP students. And I think it's time that we figure out how to explore appropriate assessments of young students. I believe that these high school students on college campuses, while it's inappropriate for us to give them this climate survey, I don't think we're capturing is that violent language I'm trying to get rid of. I don't think we are exploring what their experiences are in terms of sexual harassment and misconduct. All right, I'm going to do a time check. We're at halfway through time, so there's no way I'm going to get through all of this, but I'm going to model the first 3 pieces. So I want to get through recommendations 1 through 3. We'll pause again for questions there, and then if there's time and space, we'll look at recommendations 4 and 5. I do think that really answering questions about recommendation 5, which is adopting a survivor-centered approach, requires an analysis that really just looks at the survivors that are included in this data set. All right, so that's the overall scope. I want to talk a little bit about all the hard work that you all did to collect data this year. We saw improvement on a lot of metrics of data collection and data use. We have more credible data. These were positive movement in increase in response rates, sample size, more or less a more gender diverse set of surveys were completed. The one little bit that we lost on was completion rates. These are not massive decreases here, but we did sacrifice a little bit of completion rate, which means there's more missing data in our completed surveys. But I think the gains that we got on the other metrics were worth it. There was no way to do statistical tests here. So these are just kind of what we call descriptive results, where we're just looking at the differences. So we use our eyes to kind of look at where the highest numbers are. And again, the purpose of this is that if you're a four-year public, you don't want to be comparing your response rate to a very small private school where these response rates were across the board systematically higher than yours. So this gives you a way to compare how you did vis-a-vis other campuses that are similar to yours. Okay, so go ahead and enter in the possibilities, if any occur to you. We have an action opportunity here, which is that new strategies are needed to make 30% response rates normative across our student surveys in Ohio. There is also an opportunity to strengthen the credibility of our results by increasing completion rates, which generally is associated with a decrease in missing data. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about how to do that. We talked about lots of possible recruitment approaches, marketing, incentives. Feel free to share. I'll highlight again the big ones in the interest of time. I would consider a random sampling approach if you're one of the larger four-year or two-year public campuses. Generally, anything above a population of 4,000 students or employees is really appropriate to start to think about a random sampling approach. That way you have a smaller subset of campuses that you can work really hard to try to get 30% of them. In terms of the completion rates, I keep scouring the literature for ways to do that. I'm really putting some hope behind the idea of a completion bar at the top of the online surveys. The actual evidence out there is mixed. Some say it helps, some say it hurts, but I think since we haven't tried it, it's worth trying that. And then other targeted email collector systems where instead of just sending out a link and pushing it, really sending one invitation to each email and then trying to follow up with specific people to target messaging to those who maybe clicked on it but didn't answer, started the survey, answered 3 questions, but then stopped. You can kind of see where people are with an email collector and target your messaging. And then finally, if there were ideas in the chat box, I would love a process to be able to share these survey implementation successes. I do a lot of it. People will always say, well, what are other campuses doing? How is such and such getting this 70% response rate? So I share back, but I would love to bring a forum together where we can all share. Maybe the process includes like incentivizing it with little prizes or somehow coming up with a way to honor campuses that have figured out how to do this successfully. And again, it's about time. It's about all of these things, right? It's about timing. Again, we talked about connecting it to Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It's about who the messenger is. People that don't recognize my email might not be best to have it sent through me. So I'm thinking about ways of trying to help campuses use their own internal systems. The content of your ask, the incentives, all of this stuff matters. The second and probably my favorite recommendation is empower your campus through evidence-based training. Here we're looking at what is the messaging going at, or what is the skills-based training, the evidence-based messaging going out. We're looking at how that affects knowledge and then involvement in prevention efforts, and then the number of students and employees who take upstander actions. We did see, and people can explain to you exactly why, as your employees struggle to build entire new ways of doing their work. We know that not everybody, fewer employees were able to complete training. This is not great to see, but I think that we can understand why for some campuses that happened. Similarly, we had a really good trend of upstander action taking place, and we just got stalled a little bit. And again, lots and lots of explanations why, but what it does is provide us an opportunity for action, and we'll talk about that next. Again, this next slide here is that slide where we go into each one of those purple and teal 2021 data points and break it apart into the 3 groups. And so again, we'll see that the way that these resources of training circulate on different types of campuses is different, and it's different systematically. There are predictable differences based on type of campus. So that's really important in doing your work, is that you understand when you hear something that maybe worked on one campus, you got to think about how similar is that campus to mine. Here we see some places where there's no significant difference. So this 2.39 for involvement in prevention efforts between privates and 2-year publics is not significant. So the observable difference here, which is kind of decimal dust out here, is what we would attribute to just measurement error. And so the difference here is that private and 2-year publics have employees that are more engaged in prevention efforts than 4-year publics. Okay, so I want to focus on just one action opportunity here and the possible next steps. There's an opportunity to expand that upstander culture. Just going back to the findings of change, we saw a statistically significant increase among employees. That's awesome. We're moving our employees towards more active responses. Students, I think we just gotta restart them and get them going again. So there's a possibility here. Lots of different ways to do this. Again, if you're inspired, if you've been thinking about this and have an answer you'd like to share in the chat, put it in there. I'm going to share one that I've talked about with many of you and is one of my favorite prevention approaches, which is to market the actual positive evidence that we have about upstander culture in the state of Ohio. We do have data now. Many of you have it at the individual campus level, and we have it at the state level too, which is that there is a behavioral intent among students and employees that people would be very or extremely likely to take action against sexual misconduct if they were to see it on campus. So we know we have people that stand ready and think that they're willing to do it, and our challenge is just moving them to taking that action. The attitude, the stance is there, and it's, they're standing up. It's just a matter of getting them to take that movement. So the way that you do this within a social norms marketing approach is you take the positive data that exists. These are real data. I have now aggregated all of the data, and the vast majority of students and employees across every single type of campus. Again, down here, we can see there are difference in the extent to which that majority is there, but these are all above 80% or above, say they're willing to take action. So you just tell your campus that. Here at XYZ campus, our students and employees are very or extremely likely to take action if they witness sexual misconduct. As you do that, as that message is circulated across your campus, those who might be those who would take action feel empowered more because they know they're in the norm. They know that everyone else around them also feels the same way. Those who might be committing sexual misconduct or who may be less likely to take action when they witness it start to think, oh, well, everybody else is doing it. So you market this positive norm, and then over time, what you do is build up the collective efficacy or the perceived norm that everyone else on your campus will do the same thing. Again, in the state of Ohio, we already have that perceived norm among our employees. So employees here in Ohio are very or extremely likely to take action on their own. And they also think the majority of them also think other employees at their campus are very or extremely likely to take action against sexual misconduct. Awesome. We want to just share that. So that is a recommendation 2. Again, my goal is really to get through recommendation 3, and then we'll see where we're at. Recommendation 3 is about supplementing your evidence-based strategies, bystander training that some of you might be doing, your online training that lays the foundation of language, all that stuff that you do for recommendation 2. In recommendation 3, you want to supplement that with campus-wide communication strategies that reinforce those skills that you're training, those norms that you're trying to change, with consistent messages from a variety of different messengers and across platforms, social media, posters, policies, all these kinds of things. So there's many ways to communicate a culture of shared respect and mutual responsibility. Some of them are up there, and we saw a lot of really positive movement between 2018 and where we are now on this recommendation. The one place where we have work to do, and we talked about this a lot, right, is an increased sense of belonging and connectedness. Again, I have reason to believe that there is a history effect of a global pandemic for which the cure that we all worked at was social distancing, that may have played a role here. I will also say that a lot of campuses did not collect this data. So the fact that this is non-significant is not a surprise. It is not necessarily a bad thing, but what it is, again, is an action opportunity. So start to think about that, because I'll put up that opportunity, and feel free to brainstorm possibilities in your own mind, share them in the chat if you want. We also looked at psychological sense of safety, increased sense of responsibility, our simple rules for action, which is a similar idea to norms, where we're looking at behavior patterns, and then an increased respect for diversity and inclusion. Some of you will remember these questions. We asked, how positive is the climate for, and then you all got to pick your priority populations, military families, or people of color, or people with disabilities. And this is an or, these are ands, members of the LGBT community. Some of you asked about gender nonconforming, gender fluid, non-binary individuals, trans students. So we asked how positive the climate was for a number of different groups. And when we average all of those, we have seen vast improvements. This is one of the most statistically significant and consistent patterns across all campuses, which I think is really something to be proud of. And it's also very intriguing. There were, as I mentioned, there was an effect of campus type on every one of these key indicators for recommendation 3. So you're going to want to compare your campus's results to the column that best matches the way you think about your campus. And again, There are patterns here. We do not see a little c, which means this 381 is not statistically significant from 385, and privates and two-year publics actually are very similar in terms of how their employees responded to these different things. Okay, so we have this opportunity coming back. I'm sure all of you are thinking about what does it mean to come back for fall semester. Some of you are kind of trialing ideas with your summer semesters or your summer quarters. I know that's very rare, but to be on a quarter system, but some campuses still are. We have an opportunity to refocus our efforts to really think about fostering belongingness, this idea that I love called radical inclusivity and creating connectedness on Ohio's campuses. We also have an opportunity to better understand those indicators of shared respect, whether they be psychological sense of safety, which was lots of your qualitative data will have information, experiences pulled from the reaction to COVID in there. So there's lots to be learned about that. And this change in the extent to which a campus feels positive for members of different social identity groups. I think it's really positive that we see a trend where people feel that campuses are being more inclusive. I want to highlight the fact that most of that data, if you look at who our survey respondents are educated white women. So is there a way to see for which groups, how and when and for which groups those findings are true? So there is a, it's a positive finding, but there is an opportunity to further interrogate for whom those perceptions are true. All right, the possibilities that I've thought about include connecting with affinity groups to help interpret those climate survey findings and explore unmet needs. I think we need to do a better job of figuring out how to both design our socio-demographic survey questions, those questions that ask people what groups they belong to, and get people to fill them out. We have a lot of missing data in those surveys, which has made it very difficult to disaggregate the data. There are alternative ways we could think about collecting data to validate intersectional identities so that any one person may belong to a number of different social identity groups. And how do we start to grapple with that? It's a complex issue that is hard to put into a simple 2D table, no matter how many ways you slice it with like colors and lines and rows and columns, it's hard to really capture the lived experiences of some of our students and employees on campus. So really think about how can we better understand psychological sense of safety. I just really think this is where some of our biggest challenges lie. And then again, thinking again, how can we disaggregate or slice and dice or look at data in a way that helps us understand experiences of traditionally marginalized groups in order to, again, potentially understand and satisfy unmet needs. All right, 10:46. I will move on. Are there other questions, anything that's appeared in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
Hearing nothing, I will move on. Again, a lot of your work is going to be taking this tool and really being able to look at how does this mirror the experiences and the data that have been revealed on your campus. And then again, I would challenge all of you to think about some of the action opportunities that present themselves at the state level are all of our work. So maybe you're at a 2-year campus where your rates aren't as high. There is value in working with people from a 4-year campus that are struggling with a little bit of a higher daily in-your-face prevalence of this, and we can all learn from each other. Okay, the comprehensive response protocol. This is what we sometimes think about as policies and procedures. Y'all have continued to, adopt new regs, rewrite policies. I'm happy to report that for the most part, this has always been one of the stronger. This is why I really wanted to talk about those three, recommendation 1, 2, and 3, the big ones. This has always been a strength in Ohio. We see lots of numbers, especially among employees at nearing a 5.0. This is almost a ceiling effect of the highest kind of likelihood that could exist. I think this is interesting. And then I think this is interesting. So this did not quite, it's a trend in the right direction. It did not quite reach statistical significance. And there were particular, when I break down why this is and look at what the chilling norms are, there was a statistically significant increase. The reason this is the way that it is, there was a jump in the number of employees that reported people would not report a Title IX issue because they would be afraid of retaliation. So that is what, when I picked this apart, so each one of these rows represents 3 or 4 other indicators that are combined into a norm. There is an explanation for this that is worth talking about, and that is an increased belief among employees in the state of Ohio that people would not report sexual misconduct out of a fear of retaliation, which is interesting. Again, looking at each one of those indicators, they can be broken apart into the 3 groups, and we see, again, statistically significant differences on all 3 campus types. For the employees, these privates and 2-year publics, the employee experience is a lot more similar for employees on those types of campuses. Our 4-year publics have a statistically significantly different experience. And I think that's really worth honoring and understanding. And so again, you're going to want to compare your data from your table to these numbers based on what campus type you are in. Okay. I think there's an opportunity to increase institutional trust between students and campus officials. That number is not super low where we saw the yellow dot, but that is based on a whole host of indicators. To what extent would the campus officials take the report seriously? Would they protect students making the report? Would they do a thorough investigation? Would they hold offenders accountable? And what we're seeing is that there hasn't been any movement for students on that, where there was movement for employees on almost all campuses. There is an opportunity to learn more about retaliation as a barrier to reporting. For a long time, I kind of was like, I don't know, this is not my experience. I'm not sure if this is happening, but there was an interesting trend there. And so I think the possibilities here are really further exploring. We can think about our climate survey as when you go into the doctor's office, or in my case, when I take my child into the doctor's office. The climate survey is like when you go in that room and they take your weight, your height, your blood pressure, and listen to your heart. And if any one of those indicators is off, you don't have an answer. You know you need further explanation. So I think that the possibilities here really involve further discussion. I think creating feedback loops by sharing all kinds of results help to cement that institutional trust between students and campus officials. And again, it's not like it's problematically low, but it's not moved in the direction that we would want it to move. Again, in addition to the history effects of COVID and racial uprisings, we have also had Title IX reg rewrites, and a lot of that has been at the forefront of many campus community members' minds. So we are at an opportunity now where things, you know, we've rewritten regs, we're now starting new, and so it's really important that our feedback loops include sharing the survey results when people, and we've talked about this a lot in my individualized campus consulting, for students or employees that took the time to fill out the survey, and you all know a lot of people were salty in doing it, but they did it. Making sure that that data is seen as going somewhere and that it doesn't go into a vacuum. So sharing back helps to create that institutional trust where they're more likely to fill out a survey next time. I would argue that that same thing is true for Title IX inquiries. Your Clery reports, sharing how many people came and, you know, what was how many actions were taken. I know that there's a lot of FERPA, and I know that there's a lot of restrictions on what you can say, but figuring out a way to say something, to be transparent a little bit about what's happening when people come to your Title IX department, what happens when they fill out a survey that comes to them from their Title IX department, creating that feedback loop. Obviously, presenting the information, getting it out there is the most important thing, but creating opportunities for real dialogue and critical conversation, co-creation of it, co-interpreting those findings, that's even better. And that's this next thing. I just think we had a lot of campuses, and you'll raise your hand in your mind if you're one of them, where we saw lots of increase on the Title IX confidence that officials would do the right thing for employees, and no change or negative change for students. Bringing together groups of students and employees and like asking, why do you think that is, would be so fascinating to me. So I think the idea of bringing people across difference, and here we know that students' perception and institutional trust is different than employees, like, let's chop that up together, like get into it. Easier said than done, I know, but that would be my recommendation. I'm gonna look one last time at all right, we're at 6 minutes. I really do think that this last piece deserves a analysis that really just pulls out the survivors and looks at them. Have not had a chance to do that yet. Very simply, we do see some really statistically significant positive directions. More students are not telling anyone. Fewer students are keeping silent about what happened to them. So there is a question of how many tell no one what you say. Who did you tell what happened? Statistically fewer students are saying no one. Fewer students are checking that box. There is an associated increase with the number of students that are reporting it. There was a trend towards a decline in satisfaction. This did not reach statistical significance. Again, these results are going to vary based on your campus. We actually, for once, see four-year publics kind of leading the show here. You have very vocal students, and I'm sure you know this. People are learning to talk about it with many different kinds of folks. Again, we have some opportunities. We have some possibilities. I think we still need to think about increasing the number of survivors who have access to campus resources, particularly resources that provide them with support. We want to increase the satisfaction with those official procedures for those folks that do decide to move forward, and the possibilities. Again, these are here. I would say similar to, for the same reason, for that idea that the climate survey is really just taking a pulse. I don't think we're ever going to get enough information from a climate survey to really be able to do justice to these important questions about what are possible next steps for creating a survivor-centered approach. I do think we need to do more specific targeted evaluation of what actually happens in that process. So those are my thoughts. I am at the question part of this, and I really would encourage people specifically in the mechanics of using and understanding those graphs. If this would be your opportunity to kind of go back and ask me to in a slow manner. I don't have anywhere I need to be at 11. If you need to hop off, you can. If not, if there was a question about this that you have, somebody watching this video later on might have it as well. So I'd be happy to walk through any of that more slowly. There is a written document for you to peruse on your own time frame. So unmute yourself and speak to me if you'd like. Otherwise, I know so much information, right? So much possibility. I speak on behalf of the entire Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence Climate Survey team to say how grateful we are for all of you for hanging through what Carrie mentioned has been a marathon of a process in just collecting the data. We now have a wonderful opportunity to use the data. I see us at a really critical restart moment in terms of doing this work, thinking about the role that data plays in this work.
Real quick, Sharon, it looks like Monique has her hand raised, so.
Yes, Monique, let's hear your question.
I don't know if it's more of a question for Carrie. It's now that we have the state survey results, will the state be doing anything differently when it comes to providing like our awareness campaign, maybe updating that, or doing more things to dive in about diversity on campus? Is it going to take this feedback and provide resources and tools necessary for us to improve?
Yeah, so I think some of that work has already started. We definitely have the cultivating liberation pieces in the spring, which for those of you who are unable to commit to that time frame, and be sending out an email either later today or tomorrow about how to access that information. So it's definitely a conversation piece that will continue. There are some other things that are in the works that I cannot quite share publicly at this point. One, contracts have not been drafted or agreed upon, as well as some of this will have to go in front of controlling board and get approval from the General Assembly before I can expend money. So, so there are some pieces there, as well as the awareness campaign stuff. You know, those toolkits and stuff are still relevant. I understand and agree that we maybe need to revisit like how you do that, or just a backup training on that piece. So those are all things that are on my radar right now, but I cannot speak to anything. Hopefully there will be a budget signed tomorrow that will help me frame up what I can or cannot do with guidance, as always, from the General Assembly as to what they would like to see. So, but I will share that in due course. Some of these pieces were already kind of in place or in my mind before getting the survey results, but definitely that will help bolster some of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, some of this is literally hot off the press. Just continue to kind of go back and look into a lot of these statewide results. So there is a lot here, and there are the written resources can be made available. I can also try to turn these slides into a PDF and share for people who are interested, can contact me here at this email here. Carrie also has copies of those to share back. So great.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. And Sharon, once again, thank you so much for your leadership and your hard work on this and helping to guide our campuses and put this information together. We just so appreciate all of your work and dedication to this. And again, the flexibility for the marathon. that this has been. For all of you who are joined us today, thank you once again. You have the contact information as needed for any of the pieces Sharon mentioned today. And as well as if you would like a copy of this recording, I'll be happy to provide that to you all. So I hope everybody has a great rest of your week. Stay cool today, people. It's hot out there. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.